Welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast, where we explore the game-changing understanding that can unlock new levels of performance and well-being in the workplace. If you want to be part of the new breed of leaders in business, if you're fed up with the conventional echo chamber, and if you want to be part of a revolution in human potential, then join us to discover the powerful resource that lives before our psychology.
Hello. So today's episode is different because we're going to talk about a topic that I don't think I've really ever talked about on the Quality of Mind podcast, and that is football. And of course, it is going to be relevant to the mind because everything I talk about is the mind, but particularly because there's been a lot of football on recently, the end of the Premier League, World Cup coming up, and people do like football. And the best person to do that with is a regular to the show. And he's a man of many talents because he's been on the show and talked about cycling. He's talked about running a marathon with an elephant on his head. He's talked about his own spiritual awakening. So, Craig Willman, welcome back to the show. And are you up for having a good old chat about football?
Definitely, particularly with a Spurs fan who's just endured one of the most awful seasons imaginable.
True. So just for context, and not this is about punditry or teams, but Craig has an affiliation suffering condition called being a Chelsea fan. And I, of course, support the team in London that everyone should support, which is Spurs. So automatically we don't like each other. That's apparently the fact that if you are a Chelsea fan and a Spurs fan, you can't like each other. So we're going to disprove that by having a great conversation. But the reason we thought we'd do this episode was I was telling Craig how I went to the last match of the season where Spurs possibly could have been relegated. And to make this relevant for people who aren't football fans per se, basically Spurs haven't been relegated for absolute decades, and it would be terrible for a club of that size, wealth, pedigree to be relegated. And they weren't relegated, and they managed to stay up. And what was fascinating was the response of the fans, the 65,000 people in that stadium, was like they'd won the World Cup or the Europa Cup. It was huge. You could call it relief, but it was joy jumping up and down that they hadn't been relegated. They hadn't won anything. Craig and I were discussing, isn't that interesting that logically you shouldn't be happy. You should be no joy at all. But if something non-terrible can happen and you can get joy, what's joy about? So that's one thing I wanted to talk about. And then talk about how football's a bit of a metaphor for life in how attached we can be to what happens. And people would then say, yeah, but that's because we're passionate. But can we not be passionate about something and not make us suffer? So that's what I wanted to chat about. So, Craig, where do you want to kick off for the first half of our podcast? Oh, gosh, this is going to be brilliant. Where do you want to start with this?
Yeah, I think your experience of that Tottenham match really interesting. Obviously, I spent the final few weeks of the season, given that Chelsea also had a pretty poor season, and mostly consumed with hoping that Tottenham would go down, and was disappointed when that didn't happen. But yeah, I think it's very interesting how relief is similar to joy. And I listened to a really revealing TalkSport call from a Tottenham fan who was there at the same game as you were. And he said he was furious with his fellow fans for celebrating in that way. And he said that what he and his two mates did is when the final whistle blew, they said, that's a relief. And then they grumpily left the stadium and went back home. And he said that was the proper thing to do. They shouldn't have been jumping around celebrating like that. And I just thought it was quite funny to see somebody with full sincerity get annoyed at other people's joy.
Yes. And I think if we just listening to that from a quality of mind perspective, is that person would have to be quite attached to their thoughts of how it should be. As in, this can't be joyous, even though there was a prevailing feeling of joy, excitement, aliveness in the stadium. They'd have to go, no, we shouldn't be like this. And they'd have to almost restrain themselves from being affected by anything else and judge and criticize what they saw, thinking somehow it wouldn't be right to have a feeling of joy or aliveness. And if they did, they were somehow breaking some kind of etiquette or rule of life.
Yeah, which I think points to things that you talk about a lot and what the quality of mind understanding points towards. I think we do tend to think that there needs to be a reason before happiness, and it's the thing that comes first and the happiness that comes second, rather than realizing that actually you can.
So circumstance leads to it.
Yeah, and it's just funny that clearly in that situation he'd gone to this game and the thing that he wanted to happen had happened, and so clearly the parameters were there for him to have a moment of joy, but the thinking mind had blocked that for him.
Yeah.
And that's a quite extreme example of it, but that happens to all of us, I think, throughout the day and normal life.
And I think, I'm guessing here on the pathology of this, but it would occur to me the reason our conceptual mind would come up with that is it doesn't want to think that joy is just unconditionally available, or okayness is unconditionally available, because that might create behaviors that we don't think are sustainable or want. So when let's say children laugh at the wrong thing, or they're okay with failing on a test, you've got to take this more seriously. You got 1 out of 10. That's not good, because if you have an attitude like that, then you're going to fail in life. So it's almost like we think in order to keep ourselves safe and surviving and thriving, we have to have a conditionality to being okay and joyful, rather than just being like a 2-year-old who's carefree, because being carefree is dangerous. I think that's probably the conceptual narrative that we've accidentally been conditioned. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, definitely. And what's interesting with football in particular is that, and here I talk about a healthy relationship with football, which isn't always the case. And I think perhaps in my earlier years, I possibly had an unhealthy relationship with it, such was my obsession. But if you have a healthy relationship with football, you are fully invested in everything that happens. You really want your team to win. You are, when the match is on, there's nothing else in the world exists other than this match, and you're kicking every ball. But you do know deep down that it's a game. And if real life intruded, some big news in your family happened, you'd be able to immediately take that football hat off and go and deal with that thing. So you're fully invested in this thing, but you know deep down that it's not real, if we can use that word. Whereas how I think a lot of people approach life, and say, this is probably certainly me a few years ago, fully invested in football, but knowing it's not real, but then believing life, the rest of life, job, relationships, what have you, to be completely real and 100% serious, and yet not as invested in those in terms of being present and fully focused on them as I was in football.
Yeah. So if we put that in pure quality of mind language, so for the regular listener, we talk about real and never true, in that everything we experience in life is real but never true, as in it's never objectively causal to what's going on. It's never objectively permanent, but it will feel real. Now, let's take the scenario where someone who's not a massively football fan or whatever sees someone be miserable on a Monday because their club lost on the weekend. They would go, oh, come on, what do you mean silly? It's just a game of football. And actually, they're still miserable till Wednesday, and they're still miserable till the team wins next. They would go, oh, come on, it's just a game. So that person would see that's no reason to get upset. Now, this very same person who's criticizing the football fan for being too conditional on their football team's result could also themselves not like the fact they didn't get promoted at work and be miserable because of that, or because someone got something else they thought they should have. Now, one of them has got a rule that says football's a game, it doesn't matter, but work does. But it's exactly the same thing.
Yes.
So it's just where you draw the line on what you think is a game and what isn't. Now, what we point to equality of mind is that everything is real but never true. Not just the silly old football game, but everything in life is real but never true, in that it has an effect on you, as in it has a direct causal power on your well-being and joy. It's not just, oh no, football doesn't. Oh no, getting promoted at work doesn't. Nothing does, because the bit of us that is consistent, eternal, and universal is before anything that happens to us psychologically. So we're always intact, and that ability to have okayness and joy is there regardless, even if serious things happen to us, not just football things, but life things. And I suppose it's really easy to see with football for people that aren't unhealthy attached to their football, but possibly not so easy to see with other things in life.
Yes. And so I'd say to the person who makes that point about football, it's only a game. What are you getting so worked up about? To just take that argument one step further, because they're not wrong about that, and to apply it to their own job and their own life, but then also to actually look at the football fan and say, this is someone who's just really miserable and actually letting it affect their rest of their life. And I certainly used to be that, but that's perhaps not necessarily the healthiest relationship with football. Whereas somebody who has a really healthy relationship with football can be fully invested into it on the day, but is maybe, isn't slitting their wrist the next day. But
yes,
the point being that the person who makes that argument about football can take it one step further to the rest of their own life, but also could perhaps, by taking their own life slightly less seriously, might find they are more present.
That's the interesting thing, isn't it? Because the counter argument would be, if you don't really care what happens, then you're not really in it. You're not getting as much out of it. You're not as passionate. You're not as present to it. You're not kicking every ball with the players. You're not living it. I think the opposite is the case. In football, you sometimes see people put their head on their hands when it comes to penalties. I can't look. You're not present. They're actually hiding away from it. It's so tense. They can't cope. They have to walk away, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, but what we're saying is, if you've got that, what I would call that neutral attachment, you can be really present to it. And sometimes if you're watching a game of football and it's not one of the teams you support, although it may be a different experience to supporting your own team, it can be a beautiful experience because you're just watching football for, if you like football, that is, right? Like someone else would be watching a music concert or going to an art gallery just for the skill on the pitch and just for the aliveness of it. But it hasn't got the attachment. And actually, an interesting thing, I think I've said this on other podcasts, it was Rupert Spira that first pointed me in this direction, was he was referring to it in tennis, actually. But if, let's say you got to the tennis match going on and you're a Nadal fan, not a Federer fan, and one of them does a most amazing shot, you'll find everyone at that watching that goes, even if it's not the person you support.
Yeah.
And that's pointing to the fact that in that moment, before the intellectual conceptualization, oh, it's the wrong person that did the right thing, kicked in, there was a moment of the impersonal brilliance of that reverberating round the whole of the consciousness.
Yeah.
And then very quickly, the mind would go, I shouldn't be saying wow to that because it's the wrong person or the wrong team.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a really good, really interesting example. Another one that just sprung to mind is, and we'll see this a lot in the World Cup, is that you can see all around the stadium tense faces, and like you said, people with their heads in their hands. Often the camera will linger on a couple of supporters and they'll be biting their nails, tearing their hair out. They then notice the cameras on them and in quite a lot of the cases, just suddenly burst into life and start waving at the camera. And they're suddenly delighted that they've been caught on camera. And I think that's a really funny moment and something that clearly it's possible to be snapped out of that stress. And that, I think there's a way that in your everyday life, you could almost imagine a camera suddenly pointed on you and you're in the middle of doing your tax return and you're tearing your hair out. And then you suddenly go, here you are. Hello.
Yes. And that's interesting that the mind can do that, isn't it? So, as you say, if you're worrying about football and then you get some bad news about someone you love, you won't care about the football.
Yeah.
The mind does go where the attention is thing. And that thing that you thought was bothering you won't bother you. But if it had true causal power, it should carry on bothering you.
Yeah.
So the mind only goes where the meaning making and the self-identification and resistance to the isness happens. Right. So you could also see, we bring another element in, you can see the same piece of football from two sides of the pitch, the same referee's decision, and it will look totally different depending on your psychological makeup.
Yeah.
Totally different. And you will swear blind that no, that wasn't offside or that was, or that referee. And it's almost, although you can hear the other fans saying, no, it wasn't, yes, it was, you didn't see it like that. It didn't look like that.
Yeah, that happened on, I think we're recording this 4 days after the Champions League final.
Yeah.
And there was a moment in the second half when Madueke, playing for Arsenal, goes down in the box. And I was watching in a pub full of Arsenal fans, and every single one of them was convinced it was a penalty.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and was like, I just don't think it is. I think he pulls the defender down. And I was just able to have what I felt was objective. Obviously, there's a slight maybe bias against Arsenal there. But certain filters make you see the world in an entirely different light.
And I think there's something else here. The other thing that I think the reason people love getting passionate about their football is the tribe, the camaraderie, the kind of the pub all saying the same thing, and there's something that feels safe about that, or feels validating that another bunch of separate selves have had the same view as you, and like, that's wrong, and and this happens not just in football, but in any kind of tribal, politics or whatever, or any viewpoint, so there's something that people move towards in feeling that safety from other people having the same view. Now, that to me enhances separation, because really we are the same. Is a Spurs fan talking to a Chelsea fan? Well, we are the same piece. We are the same consciousness, you and I. We are part of the same system as we are with people that never even heard of football, right? We are the same. I use the metaphor of water and whirlpools. We're different whirlpools, but we're the same water. We can. You'll find some football fans who just would, on the train, would just love talking to anyone about football, whether you're a Spurs or a Chelsea, because your commonality is football. Some people would say my commonality is my team, so I'll talk to the Spurs fan. I'm not talking to the Chelsea fan, right? And then someone else might just love sport and human endeavour. So you can see how you bond at different levels of identification.
Yeah.
And what we don't do as humans, well, we do, but it's rarer, is just bond the fact that we are the same consciousness, right? And that's what we've got in common. But our self minds, our identified minds, seems to like to have something to hook that onto, whether that be sport, football, Chelsea, or even our choice of Chelsea goalkeeper or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, interesting that that idea of being part of a group, an in-group, enhances separate self separation, and I think that's true to a degree. But I think there's also something going on, particularly when you're in the stadium. You feel, the individual separate self is probably less present in that stadium, particularly in a big match, particularly if there's a goal that goes in, than at most occasions in life. And there is this sense of oneness because everybody has this common desire and everybody is basically of the same opinion on everything. And you're particularly when you're singing a song, you're singing one of the chants, you're operating as a collective rather than as an individual.
Which actually makes me think of another thing else I find really odd in football stadiums. So, and it happened the other week, the day when I was there. So I'm sitting where I am, and to the left of us is the away fans, and there was a particular guy about 2 rows in front who did the thing where he spent most of his time baiting the away fans. He'd be turning away from the game to give them certain gestures that I won't do on a podcast, and kept looking at them and then us to kind of, let's wind them up. And it's like, what are you doing? The football's over there. He would be doing this stuff.
Yeah.
He was trying to wind them up, right? But he was had a sort of look on his face of passion and joy. He enjoyed doing that. Most people around him weren't that really, thinking he was that smart a guy, because he was kind of annoying. But I've seen that happen again and again and again.
Yeah.
So psychologically, what do you say is going on there?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah.
I think he thought this is what being a football fan is you spend half your time looking at the pitch, half your time jeering at the away fans, and then sometimes he'd turn around to us and kind of go, "Come on, come with me on this." He'd be raising his arms up and go, "Yeah, sing louder," and he'd sing all these chants, so I think he just thought that's how you do football. It didn't make any sense to me.
And I used to go to a lot of away games, and you do kind of, you are, singing songs at the opposition supporters, and you do, like, I think in a way it's almost like a safe space for hatred and a sense of, I think it's something particularly for, I would say it's something particularly for men in their late teens and early 20s.
Right. So it's almost like a little bit primal in us, particularly maybe all males. And it's in a modern world, we don't get a chance to be that primal, and it's still safe, and it's kind of learnt. There's a rites of passage, possibly. Because I'm interested in why you don't do that anymore. I mean, you just see it as fun pantomime now. Maybe your system doesn't feel it needs to prove itself as an individuated, separate human anymore, because it's more happy just being in the mass, in the collective.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think the sort of non-dual, the force psychology understanding that I have developed, but I think that has made the whole thing seem slightly ridiculous, and it becomes, like you say, once you know that we are all the same consciousness, the idea of hating anybody is totally absurd.
And acting, and you could, the two actors could be absolutely going at it on stage, and afterwards they don't realize they're actors, right? So they could do very, very, and actually could be quite alive with the hatred and have tears, and it would be real but not true. And as soon as the curtain's shut, they could be best of mates, right? And I suppose that's because they know it's purely a play, it's a game.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying is, in the old days, you didn't quite see it as that. You might have actually left the stadium still hating that Spurs fan or that Man United fan. Yet now you can just go into the pantomime of it, kind of having a good jeer about them, but you love them deeply when you walk out of the stadium.
Definitely.
That's the difference.
Yeah, it is the difference.
We're almost talking about, in quality of mind language, different levels of aperture. Right?
Yeah.
So what you were, when you were younger, you had a contraction aperture, and you would kind of genuinely hate that person for the period of time, but you would never want to get violent or do them harm. In the extremely contracted aperture, no, you do. The only way you can be valid and safe is by damaging someone else. That's what a contraction aperture looks like. It looks like that there's a lack of love in the world, or lack of abundance and okayness in the world, and if they've got it, I don't have it. Therefore, I've got to make them worse than me. So I need to bring misery into them so that I'm okay. So the only way I can validate myself, because if you're coming from lack, is to be violent. And there are people, sadly, in our world right now who are doing things in Russia and Ukraine and wherever else that are doing that. So that's on the contraction end. And then on the expansion end, when you're in a really expanded aperture, you can be just totally present with the players, the ref, the fellow fans, and just be present to the game and the skill and the aliveness of the unpredictability of what's going to happen. And wow, and you can be really present to it, have all the aliveness without any of the angst and the suffering and the self-identification, because it is purely just a playing out of consciousness in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can really, and I think there's a huge degree to which all of that understanding has played this part. And then there's also a degree to which just getting older and being more mature has played out. But I can, a real moment where I knew there had been a big shift was England losing the final against Italy in 2021. Which was where, like, I'm unlike you, I've seen my football team win all the trophies. So, the only thing I haven't seen is England win something. And so,
England men, just to be clear here,
yes,
England
absolutely.
women, well done.
That's very true. Yeah. And very much wanted that to happen. And like within sort of 10 minutes of that, missing the penalty and England ultimately losing that game, just feeling that sense of total okayness and also a sense of kind of gratitude that I'd had such a great summer, watching the various games with friends and that it'd been such a ride, and also, seeing the England men in a final for the first time was a great thing, and just kind of going, well, that's all good. That's all fine. It's quite nice, and experiencing that feeling of disappointment, but without catastrophizing it. And so that was whereas in previous England and Chelsea defeats, that hadn't been the case. So
actually, I remember it, and I think weirdly the real feeling I had after that penalty shootout was utter compassion for, was it Saka, Sancho, and someone else who missed?
Rashford,
I can't remember who it was. Rashford, young guys who had stepped up, right, to take this thing, and just really having total love for them for what they did, which was to put themselves on the line and step up and do this thing, and hope they didn't feel bad about it and realize, no, the nation, you haven't got the weight of the nation on you. It's just a game. Right. That was my overwhelming thing, and I really hope they recognized that, rather than walk around like Stuart Pearce did for 20 years. It felt like, so it's so fascinating, isn't it? How, I mean, penalties are another thing. Let's look at the other examples of football and how it sort of plays out for life. But in penalties, technically, you've got, at that level, the person taking the penalty should score.
Yeah.
But why don't they? It's because, let's call it pressure. And the pressure must come from a self-identification with, if this goal doesn't go in, then I'm not okay. Right? So you then got this element of what we do in life is attachment to outcome. So the same as the fans have attachment to outcome, the players have attachment to outcome, and how that can affect their ability to kick a football, which normally 9 times out of 10, 99 out of 100, they would put past the keeper.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't sky it left or right or over it, because they're technically good at football. So, and you can see it in any sport, golf, tennis, you can see where the pressure gets to someone. And we would notice that in sports, but I think it's a bit more invisible in the rest of life sometimes. We don't see it.
No, penalty shootout is such a heightened example of it. And I think it's where the concept of aperture, I think it would make a huge difference to football teams to be aware of that, and to almost, it's it's hard to do, I suppose, but if you could, when you have to select your penalty takers, you'd almost want to do it less on actually who's the best at penalties and who's got the open aperture in that moment. And put them
and that's sort of, you can sort of see that sometimes, that the manager doesn't intuitively sometimes do that. Think, that they missed last time, if they miss again, it will ruin their career. I'm not going to risk it. Whereas the younger players, in the Euros, they kind of had nothing to lose in a way. But actually, it's not nothing to lose. The keepers are interesting, right? Because the keepers are meant to not save the penalty. So the keepers can only win, right? If they don't save it, it's like, well, fair enough, you didn't save it. And if you do, you're like a hero. So that's why you find keepers do quite well in penalties sometimes, is because their aperture is very open.
Yes.
They've got no attachment to saving the penalty. I mean, they want to. There's an intention, and a preference, and a commitment to, but they're not self-identified with saving it.
Yeah.
But if there was in the history of football, a keeper who was known as the penalty saver, right, and that became their identity, they would probably become worse.
Yeah, that's really true.
So again, to make this parallel to other parts of life, not just football, is we start to see where we are self-identified and attached to an outcome, and what that does for our level of resourcefulness, freedom, resilience, flow. they're not in flow.
No, and as you say, it's because of that narrative that you're not okay without this going the way you want it, and of course that can apply to giving a presentation at work, or
Yeah.
whatever it may be,
or getting that promotion, or being able to
Yeah.
pay the mortgage, or we get attached to these things and think, if that doesn't work out, then there's a lack in me. I'm not okay. And I don't just mean not okay in the game of life, because possibly you may not be. If you can't pay the mortgage, you might have to move house or whatever. I'm not saying game of life okay. I mean, I won't have okayness, love and peace.
Yeah.
And what we're pointing to with quality of mind, for those that are not familiar with what we point to with before psychology and quality of mind, is that every single person, regardless to anything within your demographic, age, gender, location, circumstance, situation, background, is always okay at that fundamental level.
Yes.
That okayness is bulletproof. It's like the sky versus the weather. It doesn't matter what the weather's doing, the sky is always okay. But how often do we forget that? Like, the football fan you were saying earlier has an unhealthy relationship would sort of not be okay because their team lost at the weekend until they forgot that. Same with the penalty player, the penalty taker who didn't score the penalty would not be okay until they let go of that psychological attachment to, oh, I'm only okay if I score a penalty.
Yeah. And you see it with a lot of footballers who do go off the boil. It can snowball and get worse. Yeah, they get a little bit worse, get dropped, and then it can get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse very quickly. And often their personal life, their financial situation.
Yes, because
all come along
identity
as
was
well.
attached to it. Or you get the ex-pros who were known for being brilliant at what they did, then they identify for that for 10 years of their career, and then they don't know afterwards, they don't think they're valid because they're not pro football anymore, and they didn't manage to make it as a pundit or something, or as a coach. So that they then, I'm thinking of a few people that have done that, Paul Merson, wherever. So it's fascinating, isn't it, how we can identify with that. Now, you can see it at professional sports level quite easily, but then the question I would ask anyone is, where else are you doing that in your life?
Yeah.
Are you identifying and being a good parent, a good mum or dad, or a good employee, or a good citizen, or, where have we self-identify with our okayness coming from our role in life, or we achieve?
Yeah, that's a good framing might be to think, what would be your equivalent of missing a penalty for England, and would you be okay if you missed that penalty? And if you actually run that thought experiment, you realize that
it's interesting. And because if you put the context to it, someone missing a penalty in training, they'd be like, oh, I missed a penalty in training, it's fine. But Euro final or Champions League final, no, I don't miss that one. So it's not even the behavior, it's the context and the meaning we give to it.
Yeah. And the training thing's interesting because for a sports person, their life isn't, 90%, their professional life anyway, isn't like 99% training and 1% on the pitch. Whereas in a job, we don't say that there, your training might be a couple of days a year, and actually the rest of it is all live action. You're essentially on the pitch all the time. And so because of that, you see points where someone is hyper focused and really at it, but also lots of points where they're burnt out, they're working too hard, they're not getting stuff done, or they're just distracted and pushing the work away and doing something else. And I think if you brought a training mentality to more of it, so you're in a meeting and you're like, this is a real meeting, but if I make mistakes in it, I'll learn and I'll get better next time, and so it's all to the good.
It's that phrase that I don't particularly like, but I understand what it's pointing to is psychological safety,
Right.
right? So I'm not sure whether we can shoe on this in, but it's like in training, it's psychologically safe to make mistakes because you're meant to be making mistakes because you're training. So you might be trying a new technique, you might be trying a, so it's like, yeah, it's okay. We make, but then when it comes to the game, you do not, it's not psychologically safe. If you mess up, the fans are going to hate you, kind of thing, right? So, and in the workplace, we talk about trying to create psychological safety, which the reason I say I don't like that phrase, or it's not, I don't like the phrase, it's pointing to us backwards because it's saying the default is workplaces are unsafe and we have to create psychological safety.
Right.
But no, it's the other way around. Unless you have thinking or meaning that's saying you are not enough unless you get the promotion or unless you're smart or unless you do this or that, you are always psychologically safe. So babies are psychologically safe. We learn not to be. The default is psychological safety because what we are, as I said earlier, what we are at our core, innate, before our psychology, is absolutely perfectly ring fenced.
Yes.
So psychological safety, you can't really create it. It's a subtraction. Whereas we try to create behaviors that allow psychological safety.
Yeah, it's a really good way to put it.
And that's backwards. Psychological safety is an antidote to a misunderstanding.
Nice. Yeah.
Which, if we hadn't got it backwards, we wouldn't need.
I'm just trying to think if there's an analogy in football to that.
Well, it's kind of, this isn't really it, but a team's 3 up and it's 80 minutes gone and they put the new young 17-year-old guy and the man just says, go and have a knock around.
Yeah.
You can't do any harm with 3 up. Doesn't matter what happens, right? And you're you play with complete abandon and you probably score 2.
Yes, yeah.
Or something like that. And it was like, God, they're good. I see that in Formula One drivers. Formula One drivers, rookies will often have a couple of races will be fantastic because they've been told, oh, don't worry about it. It's fine. And then as soon as they get good, or people expect them to be good, they start getting worse.
Oh, absolutely. And you see that in football players all the time as well. The amount of young wonder kids that come through and then they never quite hit the heights that they did at 18 or 19 because they've been told that they're great. And
so the workplace equivalent of this might be you're a skillful... I was going to make this about you, Craig. I'll do it anyway. You're a skillful playwright and then you decide to make it your job.
Yeah.
And suddenly it becomes really hard.
Yeah.
Right. So it's that very, very talented photographer who does it as a hobby and decides, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to quit my corporate job and become a full-time photographer. And then they suddenly don't like it or it goes wrong.
Yeah. I've not got to that point yet.
Yeah, I know you haven't. But it's because suddenly the mind identifies with this needs to work.
Yeah.
I'm not okay unless I make this work. Now it's my career.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think Ed Sheeran said something about this, that music used to be the hobby and now I think he's got into painting, and so he does painting as kind of his escape from his job of making music,
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, which is odd, is why we need to escape from something we love.
Yeah. Well, there are points when you professionalize something that, well, for some people, you kind of stop loving it to an extent.
You bring contraction. You bring complication.
Yeah.
Because
I think, yeah.
Yeah. And so we can bring in flow state here, which the podcast should always have a bit on, is because what's happening when it's our hobby or when we're just in the training ground is it's way easier to be in flow. Now, why is it way easier to be in flow? Because the mind hasn't identified that it should be a certain way.
Right.
So the aperture is open. We're just allowing the brilliance to come through. There's no pressure. There's no me. It's just coming through us. The words are, in your world, the keyboard's just typing itself, by the way,
Yeah.
There's a Craig sort of sitting there, but not really doing it. And that's just flow state. And when, anything we do, anything in flow, it's done with more resourcefulness, more resilience, more creativity, more joy, more everything, more aliveness. So why are we not in flow? What's the only thing that can get in the way of flow is when we think there's a me that needs to be in flow, when we think that there's a Craig or a Piers that's job is to try and find flow.
Yeah.
And it's identifying that. It's trying to identify with, oh, this will make me flow, this will make me flow. And you can't think yourself into flow. It doesn't work.
No. It is just guaranteed to do the opposite.
Yeah. And some people in sport, people will confuse it. They'll say, oh yeah, they're doing all the mental preparation, And I remember the Olympics, there was a swimmer being interviewed afterwards. Or we could saying, like, or we could see you at the beginning of the race doing all your mental preparation so you could get into flow. He goes, no, I wasn't doing mental preparation. I was doing exactly the opposite. He said, my preparation I've done for months and years before.
Right.
I now want to get out of my head.
Yeah.
Just into the moment.
Yeah.
That's the opposite of mental preparation.
Yeah. And what you find with a lot of sports people is they're brilliant at getting into flow on the pitch.
Yeah.
And then they come off the pitch and the thinking mind takes over. And then you're, finding them getting obsessed with their image, complaining about certain things, falling out with people, all the rest of it.
Yes.
And kind of mistaking the fact that, the success they've had in their career is all down to themselves getting it out of the way.
Yeah.
And then off the pitch, they are taking credit.
Yeah. And the person who's excellent at speaking about this is, as you know, I'm a massive fan of Johnny Wilkinson and his podcast.
Yeah.
I am. And he talks about that. He said, even in the middle of the game when the whistle went, it was not the same. He when he had the ball in his hand or on the boot on the ball, that's when he was in flow.
Right. Yeah.
Anything else was not flow. It just needs to be in the game.
Yeah.
And all the change room stuff he hated. He wasn't happy because even if he would do brilliantly well, he'd want to then do well again. And it's only when he's literally with the ball in hand or very near the ball in hand, that he was joyful.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. Yeah.
Well, one other metaphor I wanted you just to talk about was you mentioned before we pressed record that I'd love you to explain because I think it's such a beautiful one. VAR and its metaphor for how we overcomplicate life. So for the uninitiated, VAR is what happens sometimes when a goal is scored, all the referees and cameras want to check whether it's actually a goal or actually that. So can you explain your little metaphor for life using VAR?
Yeah. So I think for years, football was this hugely popular sport that everybody enjoyed, but there was a flaw, which is that every now and then a goal was given when it shouldn't have been, or the opposite, a goal disallowed when it shouldn't be. And so they came up with this very clever system to stop that, to put that right, and it means that whenever a goal goes in, three people in a studio check every possible angle to try and find out if there's a way that we can disallow the goal. And that has, to an extent, meant that the percentage of goals that are correctly given has gone up, but not actually by the amount that people hope. There's still quite a lot of goals that are given when, in retrospect, it seems like they shouldn't be. But what it has massively done is it has certainly diminished one of the great joys of football, which is the moment that ball hits the back of the net, you as a fan and everyone you're with just completely loses themselves in that moment, and it's just unbridled joy and celebration. Because what happens all too often is that you're celebrating in that way, and then you see the dreaded screen VAR review, and it punctures the moment. But it also means that when perfectly good goals are scored, there's a part of the thinking brain that kicks in and goes, oh, but what if it's about to be VAR? And so you kind of wait, you delay your enjoyment, and then 3, 4, 5 minutes later, sometimes when you find the goal has been given, you're not losing yourself anymore. And this, I think, is reminiscent of the way that some people will look at their own life and try and optimize it and go, all right, well, I'm going to plan out every moment of my life, or I'm going to get up half an hour early, whatever it might be. And often these things are to the good, but sometimes in trying to improve your life, you take away some of the joy from it. And it's a good thing to reflect and think, where are you VAR reviewing your own life?
And because there's two bits of metaphor I think are nice, which is one is where are we trying to over optimize life when it's just perfect anyway, or even imperfectly perfect, so where are we trying to use technology or protocols or behaviors to make our life even better, and it actually doesn't make it better, kind of makes it worse. And then the other way of looking at the metaphor is because VAR is kind of like overthinking it. So in the old days, there'll be one person in the middle of the pitch, the ref, who would call the goal or not, and he'd see it as he did or as he didn't, and that was it. And then he might be wrong, he might be right. Who knows, right? Before TV, you'd never know he's right or wrong because you couldn't replay it. So it's kind of overthinking.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got to get it right. It's not because, and then it ladders into fairness, because if the referee gave the goal and he shouldn't, or vice versa, that's unfair.
Yeah.
Well, what's fairness got to do with it? It's unfair that they've got a better player that was able to score the goal. Couldn't you just say that? Oh no, that's football. So we made it this arbitrary line about that fairness has to come in.
Yeah.
And actually, nothing's fair. Fairness is made up. Everyone's kicking a football. You could have one team with a bigger goal and go, well, that's unfair. Well, it's still a fun game. So it's where we've tried to get football right. And so the analogy for real life is, where do we try and get life right? Where actually you can't get life right.
No, that's it. You might
Impossible.
feel, and particularly, I guess if you look at VAR as a decision, like either a goal goes in and you're either really happy about it or you're really annoyed about it. But VAR adds this other layer of, well, let's pick it apart for 5 minutes and see if it's natural. And I think in our everyday life, you might have a decision to make. Do I go out, see some friends tonight, or do I stay in? Whatever. And you could debate that for half an hour and pick apart all the different variation of possible reasons and get stressed about what you might miss out on or what you might gain and all the rest of it. Or you could just go, well, what feels right? And I'll just do that.
Yeah. And ultimately, that's all we're ever doing anyway. The mind then will justify it, go, I made that decision because there were 5 good reasons to go out and only 3 good reasons to stay in. So I did it. But after the obviousness has occurred.
Yeah.
So I think we try and use thought as this amazingly clever planning tool. But really, it's just a retrospective justifying tool.
Yes.
True obviousness and behavior is way before thought. Even when the mind tells us, oh no, you only did that because you thought it through.
Yeah.
So, and you can think that in football, can't you? I remember when Rooney being interviewed once, and he'd done an amazing pass. This was years ago, obviously. And someone said, how did you know to pass that ball? And Wayne, being Wayne, not being massively articulate, just went, I looked up and kicked it.
Great.
And you're just like, yeah, actually, that's the most accurate thing you could say. Because it wasn't like he computerized it.
No.
He went, well, they're running at 12 miles an hour, and he just did it.
And it's football and lots of other sports, but reward that way of thinking, reward intuition. If you've got the right intuition as a football player, because you don't have time for anything else.
No.
So it's
just in the moment.
Do you know when to pass it, where to pass it, when to kick it, where to kick it? And Alex Ferguson's advice on scoring goals was just kick the ball at the goal, because basically something inside you will work out where to put it.
If you're a trained footballer, yeah.
Yeah. So
no, if you're a rugby player, it'd be a different thing. But if you've got muscle memory to play football, that's what you'll do.
That's it. So you're not, when a player puts it perfectly in the top corner, they've not necessarily, or probably haven't most often gone, I'm going to put this in the top corner. They've just kicked it at the goal, and the muscle memory and the automaticity has taken it there. And there's so many parts of any one of our lives where we can just apply the same
and I
logic.
think because if we take the most fundamental part of us, being happy or being at peace, we talk about muscle memory in football. You have to learn that, because not everyone has muscle memory in football. Some people have muscle memory in tennis. Or, yeah, fine. But being content, being okay, is a muscle memory we've all got,
Yeah.
because we were born, well, even pre-born, with that anyway. So we don't even have to learn that.
Yeah.
We just have to recognize it's there, and that will come through until we add things on top of it, like our psychology, that gets in the way of it. So we try to do life right. We overthink it. We try and over-optimize it, which is what VAR has done, one can argue, and all the other things have done. We think there is a right answer. Oh, that goal, no. It was proven by the review that goal was incorrectly given. Well, that implies that there's such a thing as right and wrong. There isn't. So I think that's the lovely metaphor for life, is you can't get life right and you can't get it wrong.
No, but you have this team of referees and football bureaucrats in your own mind that are constantly tinkering with things and trying to weigh up all the things
And the
getting in the
reason
way.
being, because you could say, oh, well, why in tennis then don't you just take the net down, get rid of the tram lines, the in and out,
Yeah.
and then just be able to smash the ball anywhere? Surely you need, for the game to work, you need parameters. That's real and accurate. But the game is more fun when you have a net. Because I
Yeah.
remember we used to have some tennis courts near us that didn't have a net because the council didn't put one in. It wasn't as fun.
No.
Right? It got a bit boring after a while not having a net. And you couldn't really see the lines because they were all moss covered. So it is useful at the game of life level to have a winner and a loser, to have a point that's in and out. Not mean what we fundamentally are, is affected by that.
No.
It's just a game.
And yeah, and you go lines and the net make tennis more interesting as a spectacle, and your problems in your life make that more
Make
interesting.
life more interesting.
But that's
And
it, you know.
and when we see it as that, which is always like, we've got a friend who's got a challenge or a problem, we're really resourceful at helping our friends solve their problem, and it's kind of interesting to chat to them and we can relate, because we're not attached to the problem and we can come up with solutions. But when we're attached to it, no. But variety in life, challenge in life, is what makes it rich. So that's why 2-year-olds will go and find, maybe 3-year-olds, a tree to climb rather than just sit on the sofa.
Yeah.
Because they are looking for that aliveness that comes from challenge, variety, and those things. But they also know it doesn't matter whether they climb the tree or not.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like they're a better toddler because they've climbed the tree, until they get conditioned that actually it does matter how climb you know. So I think the big mistake we're making is in life now is taking it that what happens in the game of life is affecting our fundamental ability to feel love, peace, compassion, resilience, creativity. And it's not.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And seeing that a big part of what makes the truly special football players or other sports people is the love that they have. And so in your own life, lean into that enjoyment of whatever it is, because there's, as you say, everything is just lines on a pitch or a net or whatever. So lean into that challenge and enjoy it, without thinking that if I don't get this specific result, then I won't be okay.
Yeah. Just thinking, Craig, we'll probably come to the end of time. Is there a way that we can, we've rambled around this subject. I do think there's some probably interesting things that we said. Well, maybe listeners will tell us whether that's accurate or not. Is there a way we can kind of, maybe summary is the wrong word, but we were going into this conversation to make parallels between the game of football and the game of life and the mind, and what we can notice about the mind, consciousness, and what we are through football. So any pithy little insights to finish it? Because I think it's all in there, but it may have been hiding in our waffle. But how would you put a bow on this?
I suppose a key point would be to say that realizing your life is a game, you become more present and invested not less. Because I think that's something that's absolutely true, and might seem counterintuitive to people.
And it's
Yeah.
where we draw the line of what we think a game is and what we don't. So some people would say football's just a game. Some
Yeah.
people who are ardent fans, passionate, go, no, it's not more than a game.
Yes.
So we all have our own lines in the sand of what's a game, what isn't. And what we're saying is, at one level, it's all real and never true.
Yeah.
It's all a game, not to be taken frivolously. Some of it's very important, but there's a intelligence in the system that looks after that. And if we can see that the amount that it looks like we have freedom to operate, to be present, to be okay with any outcome, is all down to what we would call our aperture, depending on how self-identified you are, basically. Aperture, how self-identified am I? Am I seeing myself as a separate me that the world happens to, or am I seeing myself as part of the system? That makes a difference to whether life looks like you can be in it with freedom but without suffering or not. And I think there's so many bits of football that we pointed to today that show us that, hopefully. Going from total kind of hatred to another human being to total joy.
Yeah.
Full range.
Yeah. And I suppose another point which is very much connected is that I think it's very clear to see in football, particularly if you're a big football fan, how you can absolutely lose yourself in the moment that a goal goes in.
Yeah.
Totally lose yourself. All your baggage, your self-identification disappears, and you're just pure joy. And also you can see how you can step outside the stadium or turn the TV off and just completely be away from it as well. And both of those things are totally available in the rest of your life.
In the rest of life, regardless of what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even on what might look like the really important, serious stuff.
Yeah.
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 Craig, thanks so much for coming on and chatting about this. I love talking to you about different about quality of mind different ways, like we did the cycling one, we've done this one. So thank you for that. And listeners, really would like to hear what you hear and what we say, whether you like this kind of format of talking not directly about the mind, but sort of in different contexts, whether that's useful or not. Any feedback is always useful.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me on.
And as usual, listeners, have fun being curious and catch you next time. Thanks.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast and want to know more, check out our website at qualityofmind.biz. And also feel free to reach out and leave us a review or a comment. Until next time, have fun being curious.